Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. The battle to enforce America's laws continues across the country and in our largest city tonight. In just a few minutes, we'll talk to a New York attorney who is upset that the NYPD reported criminal illegal aliens, including a sex offender, to the feds. But first up tonight, claims that the Trump administration is a gang of Russian operatives are starting to look sillier day by day. Russian diplomats say tonight that relations are at their worst since the Cold War. The Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, is in Moscow trying to get Russia to abandon Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. He struggled, however, even to arrange a meeting with Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, Congressman Brad Sherman of California is on the Intel Committee. 2 months ago alleged that ties between Trump and Russia were Watergate 2.0. Congressman Sherman, thanks a lot for joining us tonight.
Good to be with you. I'm senior on the Foreign Affairs Committee, not on the Intel Committee.
Rather,
but,
Foreign Affairs.
To talk about these issues. Yes.
Exactly. Yep. So you have said for a long time that there are clearly ties between Russia and the Trump campaign and now administration, and you said it pretty floridly. And yet today, you mocked the Trump administration for not being able to get a meeting with Vladimir Putin. So which is it? Is Trump a puppet of Putin, or are they at odds with each other in a way that's so appalling that you're making fun of it?
Well, last time I was on the show, I said it was clear that Russia hacked Hillary. Whether Trump was in collusion with Russia has yet to be established. That's why we need an independent commission. But clearly, these revelations have put the onus on the Trump administration to bend over backwards and prove that they aren't in league with the Kremlin. And of course, this terrible action by Assad, I mean, he kills people every day by the hundreds. Right. But now to use chemical weapons make it impossible for Trump to ignore that.
But that's actually not what you alleged. I mean, you at one point said the Russian government doesn't need lobbyists in the United States, the implication being they already had them in the Trump administration. Again, you call this Watergate 2.0. You didn't just say the Russians hacked the election, whatever that might mean, but you implied that they did so with the active cooperation of the Trump people, and your story just fell apart based on the actions of the last week, hasn't it?
No, obviously Flynn is gone, and he was particularly close to the Russians, but one would expect, with all of the bright light that has been put on the Russian-Trump connection, that there would be an administration trying to bend over backwards, and then they have to deal with events, and the events are that an air base was used to gas civilians, and the Russians are all over that air base. If they didn't know, then they're not operating very effectively as a military force. They probably did know, and so any president has got to respond to that.
But I'm
as to Watergate.
Wait, but you're saying that the Trump people had to bend over backwards to accommodate Russia, but now they're attacking Russia and pushing Russia to distance itself from the Assad government.
Tucker, my comment was that because there's so much attention to whether or not they colluded with Russia during the campaign, they now have to disprove that by being even a little tougher against Russia than they might otherwise be. So you're saying that
you and your fellow Democrats pushed the Trump administration to unnecessarily bomb Syria to divert attention away from your theory that Trump and Putin were in bed together?
We shined a light on the Trump-Russia connection. How Trump responded to that, and I can't imagine that he would bomb Syria for political reasons, but if he did, that was not our idea. Our idea is to have a wide, clear-eyed view of Russia, whether it's their occupation of Crimea, their interference in eastern Ukraine, or their support for this
well, I'm confused as to what you're saying. I mean, if you're saying that politics, pressure that you applied on Trump played some role in his decision to bomb Syria, then you can't possibly support that bombing. You would be horrified by that if you thought that. If you thought it was even possible, you would be calling out the administration for bombing Syria, and instead you're complimenting them. So now I'm completely confused as to what you're alleging and why.
The Trump administration bombed Syria for a number of reasons. Whether one of those reasons was to prove to some element of the country that they weren't too close to Russia, we won't know. The Trump administration says they did it in order to punish Assad for his use of chemical weapons. Defense of the Chemical Weapons Convention is an important objective of the United States. one that deserves at least some limited action, but certainly not an all-out war. That being said, our objectives in Syria are threefold: protect the Syrian people and hopefully provide them with good governance. Second, crush ISIS. And third, in importance, but easiest to try to achieve, is to stand up for the Chemical Weapons Convention. But it is that third element that was partially achieved by these bombing raids.
But, I mean, let's just take 3 steps back. For months, you and fellow Democrats have waged an orchestrated campaign against this administration on the basis of the claim that they were too close to Russia. They were doing its bidding. I did not mishear you or any of the dozens of guests you serve with who have said that on this show. Now we have conclusive evidence that not only is the Trump administration not doing the bidding of the Putin government, but is acting against the aims of the Putin government. So isn't it time just to admit, you know, we were wrong on that? Well, why not just admit that? Because it's so clearly true.
Well, first, Flynn was very close to Russia. He's gone.
But they fired him.
Second, they did. And they fired him in part because of the attention that Democrats put on his involvement with Russia, his speaking fees and payments, not speaking fees, but just plain cash payments from the Erdogan regime in Turkey, etc. As to whether Trump took this action for political reasons or for good or for foreign policy reasons, I don't know. You'll have to ask him.
Okay, but you're, again,
but it is appropriate
with respect,
for Democrats to
you're dodging the question, which is, isn't this clear evidence that the Trump administration is not only not doing the bidding of Russia for whatever reason, but is acting against some of Russia's most vital interests? It's a really simple point and a simple question, and will you just acknowledge that?
The failure to sanction many of the entities that should be sanctioned for Ukraine, the failure to provide more assistance to the Ukrainian government, those are actions that are pro-Russia, but clearly the Tomahawk missiles against Assad was a step that I think almost any president would have taken under these circumstances.
Okay, so
but it was an anti-Russia, anti-Iran action. The Trump administration is not a... The Trump administration may be too close to Russia, but that doesn't mean that any Democrat would say that they are.
They're not acting like a nation that's too close to Russia. In fact, we look like we're moving toward war potentially. Finally, there were apparently chemical weapons in Syria. They're supposed to have been removed. 4 days ago on the radio in California, you said that you knew that under the watch of the Obama administration, 95% of Assad's chemical weapons, sarin included, were removed from that country. You couldn't know that number with any precision, so far as I can tell. Why would you say something like that?
Well, why don't I give you the precise number? 2,600,000 pounds of toxic chemical warfare agents were removed from Syria and destroyed. Now, whether that's 95%, 94%, or 96%, the precise number, weighable and determinable by international authorities, is 2,600,000
But you don't know
pounds.
but that's an immaterial number because it doesn't get to the proportion. That could be 1% of their available chemical weapon stocks. You don't know. And the truth is, none of us knows. And so why not just admit that? The Obama administration said, Susan Rice said on television, we got all of the chemical weapons, and they didn't. I'm not blaming them for the Assad's attack, apparent attack last week. I'm just saying they lied about it. Why not just admit that?
They clearly didn't lie about it. They thought they were getting all. We don't know the exact amount that was retained or what was manufactured or provided by Iran or Russia since then. But we do know that under the Obama administration, 2,600,000 pounds of toxic agent was removed. That's a precise number and an important number because you got to ask how many hundreds of thousands of people
could have... sarin last week. I mean, they're not celebrating.
Yes,
it's an immaterial number, right? Because they're still using chemical weapons.
Well, it's not immaterial when you realize that this raid could have been far worse. Now, no matter what happens in a disaster, if you're one of the people who die, that disaster is as big as it could possibly be. But the fact is that just because a line of action isn't perfect, an action that removes from Assad 2,600,000 pounds of chemical weapons begs the question, how many hundreds of thousands of people could he kill if he had been able to retain that sarin gas?
Well, I guess that's the glass half full approach to it. Congressman, thanks a lot for joining us. I appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
The Trump administration has been sending mixed messages about its goals in Syria. During an interview today with Fox Business's Maria Bartiromo, the president said he does not want to send U.S. soldiers there.
We're not going into Syria, but when I see people using horrible, horrible chemical weapons, which they agreed not to use under the Obama administration, but they violated it.
They said they got rid of them.
Hey, look, what I did should have been done by the Obama administration a long time before I did it. And you would have had a much better, I think Syria would be a lot better off right now than it has been.
But today, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said that Syrian President Bashar al-Assad must go.
It's clear to all of us that the reign of the Assad family is coming to an end. But the question of how that ends and the transition itself could be very important, in our view, to the durability, the stability inside of a unified Syria.
Well, the Secretary of State spoke for almost all of permanent Washington. They would like to see Assad go. They're demanding it. Katie Hopkins dissents from that view. She's a global columnist for the DailyMail.com, and she joins us now. Katie, thanks a lot for coming on. So why are you against removing Assad from power in Syria?
I think we have to remember Assad is a secular leader in an area where everyone is run by their religion. He is there to protect Christians. He is the legal leader of a sovereign state, and he is winning this war. He is ahead in the war, and this war needs to be over. There is no doubt the man is a monster. He has done terrible things. But I would always say you need to choose your monsters. We saw from the disastrous triumph of the Arab Spring what happens when you depose a leader, but there's no one there to take his place. And we also saw just this week what happens to Coptic Christians in Egypt when there's no one there actively defending them. Under Assad, women had the vote, women could drive, and Christians are protected. I think we just need to focus on who the real enemy is, and the real enemy is ISIS.
Women could drive. There were basically, at least compared to life under ISIS, some liberal Western freedoms, recognizable Western freedoms under Assad, appalling though he is. Why then aren't liberals in the West calling for the preservation of his regime, or at least it's confusing to me why they're so certain he should be killed?
I think there's a curious thing that says he's a monster, he's hurt his own people, this civil war's been going on for 6 years, 800,000 people died or misplaced or displaced from their homes. People kind of want to react to that and say that something must be done. And I think we could agree that something has been done. Trump's been very clear now, if you cross my red lines, I mean it. But I'm really pleased to hear that Trump said we're not going to go into Syria. There aren't going to be boots on the ground. There appears to be a kind of climbing down from that position. So I'm fully back on the Trump train. Last week I was asking, who stole my president? Where did Trump go? But now I feel convinced that Assad will remain in power. I believe he will end this war, and I believe things can now move forward.
So, Katie, you've been watching this world for quite some time. Simple question. The people who are now telling us that if once we take Assad out, everything's going to be fine, it'll work itself out somehow, those are the same people who told us that the housing market was fine and credit default swaps were awesome. Has there been anything that you've seen that that group of people has predicted correctly in the world in, say, the past 10 years?
No, it's a bunch of nonsense, and you make me sound quite old, Tucker, if I'm honest, saying I've been around watching the world for quite a long time.
I just noticed this. I wonder if anyone else has noticed this.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tucker. I appreciate it, all the same. But I do really feel, having looked, and all the time I've been writing for DailyMail.com, what I consistently see is liberals spouting the same old nonsense, predicting the same old nonsense, giving me polls that tell me nonsense, all to no avail. They said Assad must go, Assad's the baddie, and when you ask them the simple question, okay, but then what? Who then? Who's going to lead? They have no answer. Liberals are basically utterly bonkers.
Yeah, stop getting in the way of our war. Okay, really quickly, closer to where you are in London, there was a big fire that burned down most of a migrant camp in Dunkirk, France. There we have pictures of it on the screen. A fight apparently broke out between Kurdish and Afghan migrants. How bad is it? It looks bad. What do you know about this?
Yeah, I mean, well, you say it looks bad. I had a suspicion early days that maybe they burnt it down because they couldn't get 4G. You know, that's what we come to expect from migrants if they aren't treated in the way that they've become to anticipate they should be. I spent some time in Calais in the migrant camp there because I wanted to see what it was really like. And within 2 hours of being there, the migrants were trying to break through the fence to get onto the trucks to England. My photographer was mugged, his equipment was stolen. We were bundled into a shipping container for our own protection and had to be taken in the back of a transit out of the camp. The thing I learned while I was there is that whilst these migrants arrive, they are not one group. Those old animosities, those old hatreds, that division from back home, they bring it with them. The Afghans don't speak to the Eritreans don't speak to the Somalis don't speak to the Kurds. And the same at Dunkirk, it was the Kurds that were setting fire to the huts, going in, throwing oil over the stoves, and that's why that camp has burnt down. So they bring these problems to themselves. We make a mistake when we call them migrants because they're not a homogenous whole. They are still rival factions.
Not the France we remember from junior year abroad. Katie, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks.
Next up, the NYPD is defying Mayor Bill de Blasio by reporting illegal aliens to the feds. Up next, we'll talk to a lawyer who's outraged at this enforcement of American immigration law. Also, we'll have the next part of our series on opioids. We're doing it all week. President Trump has pledged to help fix the crisis. We'll tell you more about his new pick for FDA commissioner. Stay tuned. Well, New York's politicians say their city is a sanctuary for illegal aliens, but the NYPD apparently has its own ideas. New York City police have reportedly been informing ICE, the federal immigration authorities, of the court dates of illegal immigrants charged with crimes, thereby giving ICE the information it needs to make arrests. Lori Zeno is co-founder and deputy director of Queens Law Associates. She recently described that policy as, quote, outrageous. Lori joins us tonight. Lori, thanks for coming on.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
So it's a pretty black and white story. David Gonzalez, he's an illegal alien. He's 51 years old. In 1999, he was convicted of sexual assault on a child and deported from this country. He snuck back in, and last month he was busted on the number 7 train, New York City subway, molesting a woman. The NYPD brought him in, then they called ICE so he could be deported again. He's here illegally, and you say that's outrageous. Tell me why.
Okay. Well, my opinion about it being outrageous is really based on the bigger picture as opposed to the individual client. Mayor de Blasio has gone on television and told New Yorkers that New York is a sanctuary city, that immigrants, all New Yorkers, are safe, and that we essentially have your back. And then what happens is immigrants walk around and they think everything is safe and they're okay, and you know nobody's going to turn them in to immigration, and then they get arrested, and NYPD actually calls immigration from central booking, and the outrageousness is really twofold.
Wait, can I stop there? I just want to make sure I have this straight. So you're saying it's outrageous that Mayor de Blasio doesn't, quote, have the back of a convicted illegal alien sex offender who molested someone else on the subway. He should have his back?
Well, like I said, it's not about an individual client, it's about the bigger picture. Because
well, it's actually about an individual case where this actually happened as a real person. This
actually
took
actually
place.
Happened.
So, right,
but we're
and you
talking
said it was
about
outrageous.
government. No. We're talking about government agencies. We're talking about New York City Police Department. We're talking about the New York City courts. We're talking about the mayor
You want to
of
take
New
it to
York
an
City.
abstract level of 35,000 people. Let's bring it back down to subway level. This guy apparently tried to molest a woman on the subway. He's here illegally. He's a convicted sex offender. This is a tough one to defend, I'll concede. But you're saying that Mayor de Blasio should have his back, shouldn't be mean to this guy because why?
Well, it's not about being mean.
How about deporting him?
And you know what? I'm not saying whether or not the mayor should have somebody's back or not. The mayor said it.
Just said.
Okay. No, I said the mayor said it. The mayor came on television and said, New Yorkers, we're all safe. Don't worry. And in fact, They're not. When they come to court,
So some
they
of the
are
sex
not
offenders
safe.
aren't safe in
Well,
New York
it's not
now.
about whether it's a sex
Well,
offender.
it's actually about a specific guy called David Gonzalez.
Well,
and
you
he-
want to make it about a specific
Well,
guy,
I don't know.
but I'm a public defender who
just
handles
got
30,000 cases
for
a
sex
year.
offense. I get it.
Right.
But this
So it's
is
not
a
just about
specific
one
case.
person.
Right. You want to make it about everybody, but I'm just saying if you were on the subway and got molested by David Gonzalez, maybe you would ask, what's he doing in this country?
I
and
might.
how did he get back after being convicted of sexually assaulting a child?
Well, I
and
might
maybe
ask
you
all
wouldn't
those
feel
things.
like, oh, that's
and
unwelcoming.
maybe that's, no, actually, I might ask all of those things. And if I'm an individual person, I get it. I get the individual person is saying, okay, folks, listen.
But you can't think
they're
about the
here,
individual because that makes it too complicated?
No, 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 no. I can absolutely think about the individual.
Okay. I'm losing
I can
track here.
understand an individual's point of view. They're here, they're illegal, they're
Right.
committing crime, you're the police, you're the
molesting
courts,
my
why can't you make them
children. Right.
leave?
Yeah, right.
Got it, okay.
Yeah, got
and
it.
I get that you want to continue to say they're molesting children, they're molesting children.
Well, he actually did
but
molest
this
children.
person,
That's not making it
maybe
up.
this one person molested a child, he was convicted of that. But it's a bigger issue when you're talking about government.
Right.
You're talking about a
Okay.
mayor, you're talking about the court system, you're talking about the police department, and
Right.
you're talking about a promise that we're a sanctuary city.
But
and
I
in fact, the NYPD is calling the police or calling immigration and turning these people in
So you're
based
basically
on,
saying
let me
that-
finish,
Okay.
based on what's called an NCIC report, okay? That's a report that gets attached to the end of a rap sheet. And what comes on that report says things like, this person has some sort of immigration issue, this person's up for deportation, this person may
molested
be
a
wanted for a
child.
murder
Yeah.
in Texas, this person was convicted of this or that or the other thing, right?
And you're telling me we shouldn't take that into account because why? Why don't you answer this question, Lori? How does that serve the interests of people who are here legally, like
Well, here's
American
why we
citizens,
shouldn't
like
take
me
that.
or you or our children?
Okay, here's why we shouldn't take the NCIC report seriously, because it is based on a name check and a date of birth. It's not based on somebody's fingerprints. It's, well,
Okay.
we think this
I don't know if you know
guy
how the
might be
system
this
works, Lori,
person.
but nobody gets deported without an identity verification. We're not
Okay.
grabbing people off the street and sending them out of the country. All those checks are done before they're put on a plane back to wherever. So
Well,
this is not
not-
a real argument you're
No,
making.
that's
and you're
actually not
alighting
true.
over the tragedy that took place to an individual, not to society or government, because it's inconvenient to your argument. And
No,
my
that's
personal
actually
advice to
not
you is you're
true.
never going to win anyone over until you can look the facts right in the face and respond to them.
I
But you
can look
can't.
the facts in the face about this particular client, like I said. However, when you are talking about a government and a
Okay.
governmental agency, and you're talking about an entire city,
Right, I get it.
You either
The mayor made a
say what
stupid
you
promise,
mean
but you
and
better
mean
stick
what
with
you
it or else
say.
it's outrageous. Okay.
Well,
Lori, thanks a lot
sure.
for
How
joining
about
us
if
tonight.
you tell people that they're safe and then they come to court and they're not?
Going to be a
yeah,
lot of
you know what?
disappointed child molesters, and you know what?
Mean
I'm
what
gonna
you
sleep
say
well
and say
anyway.
what you mean.
Lori, thanks for coming on tonight. That was amazing. Well, up next, a federal judge has struck down Texas's voter ID law for the second time. Is it possible for America to pass any laws protecting against voter fraud that don't get charged with bigotry? We'll discuss it with one of those laws' opponents. Up next. Texas has struck down that state's voter ID law, saying that expecting voters to prove their identity discriminates against black and Hispanic voters. District Judge Nelva Gonzalez Ramos says the law that requires voters to present any one of 6 types of photo identification was passed with discriminatory intent, even if the law itself is superficially neutral. Kristen Clark is with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, which helped challenge that law, and she joins us now. Kristen, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So I really do sincerely believe that you ought to make it, you ought to help people to vote. I mean, people want to vote, they should be able to vote. So I'm not for blocking any voting. But every time I hear the story, I think, well, wait a second. If you don't need a government ID to exercise your constitutionally guaranteed right to vote, why do you need one to buy a gun, which is also a constitutionally guaranteed right?
Right. So the problem with Texas's law is that only certain forms of ID qualify under their scheme. A passport, a driver's license, a conceal and carry permit, a student ID, or work ID do not qualify. And the evidence presented to the
You need
court...
government ID.
That's
is what's
right.
required, right?
That's right. Well, passports, driver's license, conceal and carry permit, but they're poor people on the margins in Texas without those forms of ID, people who don't board airplanes, who don't drive, they rely on public transportation. The evidence in this case showed that there were 600 600,000 people disenfranchised when they put the law into effect.
Okay, but I want to get to that in a minute because that number is false. But I want to get first to the principle behind this. And your aim is to protect a constitutionally guaranteed right.
That's right.
But voting is not the only constitutionally guaranteed right. And the right to own a firearm, which has been proved by the Supreme Court twice to apply to individuals, is abridged by the requirement that you show government ID in order to purchase one. And why are you not taking up that cause?
Well, we're not fighting a Second Amendment case here.
No, but,
we're fighting to
but should it be required?
Well, we're fighting to ensure that everyone has access to democracy. We want to make sure that everyone can exercise their voice.
But in our founding document, obviously this is not really about principle. I guess that's what I'm kind of establishing. If you believe that the requirement to show government ID gets in the way of people exercising their constitutional rights, then you defend them across the board, but you're not. So now to the question of 600,000 people. So if you don't have an ID, a government-sponsored ID, you cannot hold a paying job. You cannot have a checking account. You cannot have a credit card. You cannot board an airplane. You cannot stay in a hotel. You cannot get into many office buildings. You can't register your kids for school in a lot of places. You can't participate at all in American society. You're telling me in the state of Texas there are 600,000 people who don't have paying jobs, who don't receive any government benefits. I don't believe that.
So expert evidence presented to the court. 5 courts have now found Texas's voter ID law to be discriminatory in terms of its effect on African American and Latino voters.
But let's get to the numbers. Where are those numbers from? I hear this all the time. There are a lot of people who don't have ID. If you don't have government-sponsored ID, you cannot get government benefits and you can't have a paying job. You cannot rent a car, stay in a hotel. As I just said, you can't enter buildings. So how do we know these people exist? Where are those numbers from?
They are citizens of the state of Texas who actually participated in voting. 600,000 registered voters were disenfranchised when this law was put into effect.
But because they didn't have their IDs with them doesn't mean they didn't have IDs. So where's the evidence that there is a large number of people in any state who do not have government IDs?
Well,
there's no evidence of that, actually.
We're actually beyond that question in this case because the Fifth Circuit, the most conservative appeals court, federal appeals court in the country, agreed with us.
No, but let's start with the facts, because often in these stories, people in the press, because they're very shallow and aren't interested in actually digging, repeat the received wisdom. But I want to get to the core facts of this. This whole thing is predicated on the idea that African American and Latino voters somehow don't have government-sponsored IDs. And I'm asking you, where's the actual evidence for that? What study shows that?
Actual evidence that we put forth by our expert in this case, and evidence that was before the Texas state legislature when they put this law on the books. So where does it come from?
What was the study? And what was the number? How many people in the state of Texas had possessed no government ID?
Well, let's talk about the conceal and carry permit, for example.
Let's get to the core of this. You already allotted over that. You don't want to talk about it. That's fine. Let's get to the case that you're taking sides in. Where are these people? How many are there? And how do you know that?
5 courts have found the law discriminatory. 600,000 registered voters were knocked off the rolls when the law was put into effect, and that is undisputable fact.
But here's what's disputed. Here's what's disputed by me and apparently by nobody else, is that these people don't have government ID. That is what's up for dispute. It's a very different thing. If you didn't bring your ID to the polling place, it's very different from not having it at all. And there's no evidence at all that there are a large number of adult voting age Americans who don't have government ID. That doesn't exist. Do you have a counterfact to bring out tonight?
I want to be very clear.
Yeah.
Our argument in this case has not been that all African Americans and Latinos and poor people and elderly are without ID.
But how many
there are a whole lot of them. 600,000, and it's an undisputable fact before the court.
Not only is it a disputed fact, it's not true. It doesn't show, as I've said 3 times, it doesn't show that they don't have IDs. We don't have evidence for that. And I'm just saying, a lot of people feel like there is voter fraud. We don't know how much because a lot of states don't require ID.
Well, we do.
Can you see the concern that people have?
Well, we do. At the time that the law was put into effect in 2011, data showed that for the 10 years leading up to the adoption of the law, there were only 2 instances of alleged vote fraud in the state of Texas out of over 20 million votes
Can I ask you a question? If we don't require government ID in order to vote, how exactly do we know the extent of voter fraud? Well, I'll answer it myself. We don't, do we?
We know that vote fraud doesn't exist. Study after study.
How do we know that if we don't require ID, if we don't check? We know that everyone who gets on a plane is who they claim to be because we check, but we don't know that.
There's actually bipartisan agreement that vote fraud is a myth.
Well, there are a lot of Republicans who say silly things. That doesn't prove anything.
Even Paul Ryan himself admitted last month that these claims about vote fraud are overstated and baseless.
That's Paul Ryan's view, but we don't really know. Thank you so much. Kristen Clark, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Up next, we're bringing the second part of Drugged, our look at the American opioid epidemic. President Trump says he wants to confront it. Our next guest says his pick for the FDA, is a pawn of drug companies. We'll try to get to the bottom of that. Plus, a man is dragged off a United Airlines flight. You won't believe who one actor blames for the incident. I'll give you a hint. Not people who actually did it. Now to part two of our week-long series, Drugged. Tonight we take a look at America's tens of thousands of pharmacies, many of which appear to play a key role in the opioid crisis. Clay County, Kentucky is one of the poorest places in America. The unemployment rate there is nearly 10%. That's more than twice the national rate. Despite the poverty, local pharmacies are thriving. Consider the town of Manchester, Kentucky, where the population of 1,500 can choose between 11 different pharmacies, many of which seem to make their money primarily by selling prescription painkillers. Opioid addiction rates are heavily correlated with availability. In many countries, opioids can only be administered at hospitals or specially licensed pharmacies. In America, by contrast, anyone with a prescription can pick up addictive opioid painkillers at the local drugstore. In poor places like Clay County, it's even easier because Medicaid covers the bill. Easy access to highly addictive drugs at no cost leads to the exact outcome you would expect. Medicaid beneficiaries are twice as likely to have opioid prescriptions as the general population, and they are 3 to 6 times more likely to overdose on them. In Clay County, the consequences have been a disaster. There are just over 20,000 people living in the county, yet last year pharmacies there dispensed nearly 617,000 units of oxycodone and another 2.2 million units of hydrocodone. That's about 140 doses of synthetic heroin for every man, woman, and child in the county every year. What would happen to your community if that volume of narcotics suddenly poured in? You wouldn't want to find out. Remarkably, numbers like these have not yet inspired serious action from Washington. Despite nearly a dozen federal agencies that deal with drugs and addiction, almost all policy action is happening at the state level, if it's happening at all. Dr. Andrew Kolodny is co-director of opioid policy research at Brandeis University and is the co-founder of Physicians for Responsible Opioid Prescribing. And he joins us now. Doctor, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, and thank you for devoting a week-long series to the opioid addiction epidemic.
Well, I don't think the country's ever seen anything like this. And the number of emails we've received in the last 24 hours from middle-class parents whose kids are in jail or have died have really been striking. So what can the federal government do? And the states are working on solutions, but what can the federal government, the FDA, do about this?
That's a great question. There is quite a bit the federal government can do, and unfortunately, President Obama really neglected the opioid addiction epidemic until his last year in office, when he started to do many of the right things. For example, he sought funding to expand access to addiction treatment. And like you last night, he drew attention to the fact that overprescribing of opioids is fueling the epidemic. One of the things that he failed to do was to see that his agencies were working in a coordinated manner to address the epidemic. So we had the CDC calling for much more cautious prescribing, yet the FDA under President Obama continued to allow opioid makers to promote aggressive prescribing. And I'm concerned that President Trump's pick for FDA commissioner is going to repeat the same terrible performance we saw under President Obama's FDA commissioners.
Well, that would be a disaster if it turned out to be true. Here's a question I've never understood the answer to. So in the United States, if you have a prescription for opioid painkillers, and a lot of people need them for chronic pain, post-surgery, but you can pick them up at the local drugstore. That's not true in all countries. In a lot of countries, you have to go to the hospital to pick them up. Would that change make a difference, do you think?
You know, I think one of the changes we need is much more cautious prescribing. Opioids are essential medicines for end-of-life care. And they also play an important role when used for a couple of days after major surgery or a serious accident. Right. Unfortunately, the bulk of the prescribing in the United States is for common chronic conditions where opioids may not be safe or effective. We have about 12 million Americans on opioids chronically, so many Americans that we're now seeing ads on television for medicines to treat the side effects of being on opioids, like opioid-induced constipation. So what we need is much more cautious prescribing. We want doctors to weigh risks versus benefits better when they prescribe opioids.
So really quickly, doctor, that is a change. It wasn't always true in American history that drug companies could advertise directly on television. Do you think that companies that make opioid painkillers, Purdue Pharma, for example, ought to be advertising them directly to patients? Why not to doctors?
Well, with opioids, the problem has been the marketing to physicians. You haven't seen many ads on television for narcotics. I think there's been almost a self-imposed moratorium among narcotics manufacturers. The marketing has been toward physicians, and what caused the epidemic that we're dealing with today has been this sharp increase in prescribing, which was the result of a multifaceted campaign underwritten largely by Purdue Pharma, the maker of OxyContin. And that campaign, what it did was it minimized the risks of opioids, like the risk of addiction, and it exaggerated the benefits of using opioids long term. So the medical community began to hear that we had been allowing patients to suffer needlessly because of an overblown fear of addiction, and that the compassionate way to treat just about any complaint of pain was with an opioid. As we responded to this campaign, as the prescribing went up, it led to a public health catastrophe.
I've noticed. It just seems like legal drug dealing to me. Dr. Chladni, thanks a lot for coming on tonight. Up next, students at one university say they don't want Chick-fil-A on their campus because it will make them feel unsafe. Because they're going to starve to death when it closes on Sunday, or could there be another reason? Our panel next. Well, there are a lot of people you could blame for that over-the-top video of a United Airlines passenger being violently dragged off a plane to Louisville. You could blame United. You could blame the police for using excessive force. You could even blame the passenger if you wanted to, though, of course, that would be wrong. And then you have Star Trek actor John Cho, who tweeted this: "It's hard not to see a connection between the environment President Trump has created and what happened on that flight." Not that hard, actually. Meanwhile, on social media, the story is blowing up with a bunch of memes, including this one with the Southwest logo, with the slogan, "We beat the competition, not you." And in this one, you see the United logo. The slogan is, "Let us reaccommodate you." The best. So Orwellian. Time for our panel. Madison Gesiotto is a columnist at the Washington Times. Carrie Lucas is managing director of the Independent Women's Forum, and they join us tonight. So Carrie, first to you. Those are fantastic. Trump has created an environment that made this possible. What does that mean exactly?
You know, who knows? It means that right now I think anything that goes wrong, a lot of people want to blame on the president, and I think that a lot of us can say, this is ridiculous, but it really is just a distraction and a show how much people kind of can't get over, can't get politics off their mind.
So I think, Madison, what he's saying is that President Trump has created a climate of reaccommodation.
You know, it's impossible to see this connection he's trying to make. Only in Hollywood could we come up with this much of illogical thought, right? Yeah. So, I mean, according to this, if we go by this thought process, it's Obama's fault McDonald's got my order wrong last week. The only people to blame for this video are United, who can't seem to keep themselves out of the news. They've literally become the Michael Vick of airlines.
I just want to know who in the HR department wrote that statement. And why not just say, we beat the guy, but didn't mean to. He got bloody. He's unconscious. We'll promise not to do that again. Instead, it's, we're sorry to reaccommodate you.
Trouble seems to follow United wherever they fly.
If you thought that was absurd, listen to this. At Duquesne University, some students are protesting plans to open a Chick-fil-A restaurant on campus. Not because it's not delicious, of course it is, but because the company once donated to an organization that opposed gay marriage. The head of the school's Gay Straight Alliance said it would make students feel, quote, their safe place is in danger. Carrie, what about this fast food outlet could make people feel unsafe?
This is such a sad kind of statement. It's kind of, it's funny. We can kind of laugh it off and say, it's another example of millennials just being, ridiculous snowflakes and wanting to be coddled. But really, I think this is sad. We should be disturbed by this. And there's a lot of people out there, I hope in the, the gay and lesbian community who would say, come on, we're not this pathetic. We don't need, we're not upset by a takeout chicken restaurant.
Well, yeah, but it's a form of passive aggression. It's a judo move. What they're doing is conflating words with action, claiming that your different opinion is in fact violence inflicted on me, and then shutting you down.
Yeah, I think the unfortunate part about this, Tucker, is that liberals claim to be the biggest proponents of diversity, but they continue to expose themselves as hypocrites by opposing diversity of thought and opinion. this owner of Chick-fil-A or the CEO of Chick-fil-A has the right to voice their opinion, just like these students have the right to voice their opinion. They don't have to eat there,
Right.
but there's no reason why the restaurant can't be put on that campus.
And diversity of fast food, too. It shouldn't all be Hardee's and Roy Rogers. I think we can agree.
Right.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
We'll be back in a minute with an update on the FBI investigation into alleged election meddling by Russia. Yeah, they're still talking about that. Stay tuned. Well, there are reports tonight that the FBI received a secret court order last summer to monitor Carter Page. Page was listed as a foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign, though Trump's campaign team says Trump never actually met the guy, and they're not exactly clear on who he was. According to the Washington Post, the FBI suspects Page may have been acting as an agent of Russia. It's worth noting, though, that Page thus far has not been charged with any crime, and a lot of people have been accused of being agents of Russia, including me, by the way, falsely. We'll keep you updated just in case something else happens. That's about it for us tonight. Tune in every night at 9 p.m. to the show that is the sworn and lifelong enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. DVR it if you can. Sean Hannity is next. Tomorrow, by the way, we'll bring you part 3 of our week-long series on opioid addiction. We'll see you then.